Welcome to the Property Corner with myself, Rowan Alexander. On today's episode, we're going to be looking at how to deal with competing offers, whether you're a purchaser bidding against another prospective purchaser, or whether you're the seller of your home having to decide between which offer to accept. If you watch this episode, you'll have good insight and be able to make an informed decision in how to go about this. It's very often the case that when a property is marketed, you may have multiple people interested in a home. And in some instances, the case arises where someone is busy concluding an agreement of sale or busy making an offer, and a second party shows interest in the same property and also prepares an agreement of sale to be presented to the seller. So I want to have a look at, as a purchaser, if you are aware of this or if you become aware of this throughout the process, how you handle that negotiation and how you could potentially ensure that your bid is accepted. But also look at, from a seller's perspective, what are things that you need to consider when making a decision. When you get to this point and you have two competing offers, the stakes are a lot higher, because making a decision as the seller as to which offer you accept, you could potentially lose another transaction. So we would always try and encourage that if a single offer or one of the offers is accepted, that the seller would make a counter offer to the second purchaser, that they become second in line, so that if the first purchaser doesn't perform, the second purchaser still has the position or still has the opportunity to secure the home. There's a number of ways in which they can do that, through things like the 72-hour clause, where they accelerate the first purchaser's responsibilities, or if the first purchaser just doesn't fulfill his obligations, that transaction would automatically sort of go to the second purchaser. They would become first in line. So we're not going to get into that detail of that process today. Today, I want to give you advice as to how you ensure that your offer is, or things that you can do to ensure that your offer is given the best attention it can. If you become aware that you're competing against someone for a home, scrap all the ideas that you had about negotiation. If you really want that home, if you really want to secure that property, put your best foot forward. And remember, putting your best foot forward does not necessarily always mean the highest price. There's a number of factors that the seller will take into account when reviewing your offer, but only one of them is price. Other things that they would look at would be things like your payment terms, when you want to take transfer, whether you still have to sell a home. So there's a number of things that you can, a number of those factors that you can put your best foot forward to ensure that your entire offer is most favorable. So as a purchaser, here's some advice that you can use to support, and documentation that you can provide as supporting documents to bolster your offer. So you'll have your agreement of sale with whatever conditions they are in. If, for instance, you've listed that you're going to pay a deposit, ensure that you pay that deposit within the quickest time possible. Paying a deposit, or a deposit becoming payable upon acceptance of the offer by the seller, is far more lucrative than a deposit payable 60 days down the line. So make sure that your deposit that you offer, if you offer one, is payable as quickly as possible. Don't play for time. Put your best foot forward and make sure that you offer that money as soon as you can. Secondly, if you have a mortgage bond and you still need to go through the process of applying for a mortgage bond, it's impossible to get that final grant quotation without a signed contract by the seller, but you could potentially get a letter of pre-approval from your bank or from your mortgage originator. So be sure to supply that letter of pre-approval along with your offer. That shows and gives confidence that if your offer is accepted, the likelihood of your finance being granted is high, because you have been vetted and been through that process beforehand. If you have a home that's for sale and that has been sold or still has to be sold, be sure to ask the agent marketing that property for a report that shows that your house is market related, that, or if it hasn't been sold, that it is marketed correctly on the different platforms where it's being marketed, what efforts they're taking to market it, and to show that it's well priced. If the seller's sitting on the other side of the table and looking at these factors, and there's two offers and both of them have a property to sell, if the one shows its ability or insight that it's actually being marketed correctly, that it's well priced, that there is interest, it gives a lot more assurance and may be the deciding factor to swing to that particular offer. Where the second offer, there may be a lot of questions. If that property is already sold and you're simply waiting for transfer to happen, get a letter from that transferring attorney who's actually attending to the transfer of your home, and provide that letter to the seller to whom you're making the offer, to show that your house has already been secured and when it will transfer. These are things that when sellers review this agreement of sale, they may look at the impact of any of the conditions that you've added, like your house to be sold, how that would impact on their timing. So if the house has already been sold, get a letter from that attorney explaining as to where you're at and when that transfer could be expected. And then consider any other condition that you're putting into that agreement, and try and place yourself in the position of the seller. So if you had any concerns or queries that you wanted further investigation, sometimes people say, they would like a set of the building plans, or they would like a property inspector to come and inspect the property, as part of the agreement of sale. See if you can accelerate those things prior to actually submitting your offer. So get those inspectors out before you submit your offer. Get in the same way that you get your finances in order. Any other condition which you have inserted into that agreement, try and get them done prior to submitting that offer, because it reduces the risk for the seller and thereby makes your offer sort of more palatable. If the seller is in a position where he's reviewing two different offers, we would advise them to look at the risk in those transactions. And the more risk you can remove, the better chance you give yourself of actually securing that home and outbidding the other purchaser. What was the other thing? And then lastly, don't make any unreasonable or unnecessary demands in your agreement of sale. Sure, if there's things that you want clarity on and certainty on, and there's conditions that you want in your agreement of sale, put them in. But when competing with another offer, you need to make that decision as to what is not negotiable and which are nice to haves, because it may mean that you actually have to forego some of those nice to haves, and in ensuring that you are first in line. If you have any cash payments that will form part of your purchase price, whether it's in the form of a deposit or a balance of purchase price, if that money is available, or if that money is invested, get letters from that investment house, or print your bank statements from those accounts and offer them as supporting documentation showing that you could actually come up with the money which you are claiming in your agreement of sale. Sure, if you've made commitment to it in your agreement of sale and you don't comply, you're in breach of agreement. But for the seller sitting at the other side of the table, it gives them a lot more surety and assurance if those sort of confirmations are given prior to them actually accepting that offer. And then the last little bit of advice that I could give is be strategic about the amount of time you allow the seller to accept your offer. If you know that you are competing and you're putting a really strong offer out there, you need to be aware that putting the seller under pressure to actually accept that offer by giving them 24 hours to accept that offer, it could potentially remove them renegotiating or negotiating on the sideline with another party. If your offer is very strong, you may want to reduce the period that they have for acceptance to place them under pressure for losing your deal. In the same way, if you feel that there may be merits to extending that period, this could also have its benefits, whereby you don't put them under pressure and you show that there's different qualities that sort of come about, in showing them that you're not trying to put them under pressure and that you want to make the deal work. So it also allows for some time with more negotiation with you. That is there's no golden rule as to that timing. But remember that the timing is something that you could also use to your benefit when you are competing against another offer. So besides just price, very often when purchasers know that they're competing against someone else because they've walked through a home and they've seen that there's other purchasers, or they suspect that they're competing against someone else, they only look at the purchase price. But the purchase price is not the be-all and end-all of your offer. It's one of the elements, and it's a very big element in this agreement of sale. But there are other factors too, which you need to take into consideration. And to try and shed more light on this, if you are a seller, there's some advice that I can give to you too, and maybe reasoning behind the advice that I've given to the prospective purchaser and how you as the seller need to interpret that. And that, I think, also gives insight into the purchaser why I'm suggesting these things. So as a seller, what do you want to achieve? You want to achieve that your house is sold, transfers as quickly as possible, and with the least amount of risk. So when reviewing multiple offers, don't just look at the price. Look at factors like, what other suspensive conditions are in that agreement? Because if those people still need to get a bond, sell their home, if an estate still needs to be wound up, or it's conditional upon them getting a sort of certain visas or something like that. These could all potentially be risk factors for the transaction. The moment that you accept a particular offer, you run the risk of losing the competing offer. So the first bit of advice would be, do that diligently. Review the two offers diligently. And if the agent or the purchasers haven't provided that documentation, ask for them. There's nothing wrong with asking the purchaser to prove their position. If they say that they're going to, applying for a 2 million rand bond, and you'd like to see that that's credible, ask whether they have actually done a pre-approval, whether there's any documentation supporting that. The same way for any cash, that these things that I've discussed now that the purchaser needs to take into account and provide as supporting documents. If they're not there, you as the seller can request it. It's not unreasonable. By you accepting that agreement of sale, you bind yourself to those agreements and the implications that may have for you. And one of the big things that people often overlook is, upon accepting an offer subject to the sale of your purchaser's home, you inherit all of those conditions. So if that property is linked to another sale and another sale, your transaction could be held up. While it may be sold and fulfilled, transfer may actually only happen 6 or 9 months later. So be sure that you understand the implications of what you are accepting, and ask for those documents. Ask for those documents for clarity, whether there's competing offers on the table or not. It's good and standard practice, or good practice, not standard practice. It's good practice to do these things. Make informed decisions. Don't just work upon what's actually being shown on those documents, because if those people don't perform, if those purchasers don't perform, you're going to be the one that needs to fight that fight. I've seen purchasers become very creative when they know that they're competing, doing things like removing, conditions of bonds, or, removing sales conditions and trying to negotiate for longer periods of time for payment, during which they back themselves to sell their home in that period or get a bond in that period. And sure, there's, nothing prohibits them from doing that. But as the seller, you need to be sure that the offers that are being presented to you can actually be actioned, so that you can minimize the risk of losing a competing offer. Then the next bit of advice that I'd like to give to a seller is, never leave a offer that wasn't accepted. Don't just simply reject it. Go back with a counter offer. And that counter offer would be offering that property to the competing offer now to be second in line. To simplify that, if I'm a purchaser competing against someone else for your home and you accept their offer me the chance to be second in line. And the way that you would do that is to enter a condition into the first agreement of sale into my agreement of sale, stating that my offer is conditional upon the expiry or the lapsing of the previous offer between yourself and that purchaser, and put a timeline to that in my agreement. That gives me the opportunity to still apply for a bond, to still go through my processes. And I could potentially put them to terms with a 72-hour clause if there is one in their agreement. Or if anything goes wrong in their agreement and they don't proceed, I stand first in line. So if as a seller you have two competing offers, go back with a counter offer to try and secure both deals on your home, but give one preference and the other second in line. While it may not be what I want to hear as a prospective purchaser, that I may need to be second in line, if I really want that home, I may be willing to do it. So it's not to say that they will always accept being second or third in line, but give them that opportunity. That's advice that I think should be followed. Then lastly, take your time. If your agreements of sale allow for 5 or 7 or 10 days for acceptance, take your time. You don't need to make a decision immediately. Those purchasers have made an offer and they've allowed for a certain amount of time for your acceptance. And take your time and consider them. Gather all the information, make an informed decision. Sleep on it, and so that when you make that final decision of accepting, you are comfortable that you know exactly, the risks of accepting one. Because by accepting one, you run the risk of losing the other. But there's no other way to do this. This is how things need to be done. You can't accept two agreements without making the one conditional upon the cancellation of the other. What do you do if you accept both of these? You can't sell the property twice. You can't give it to two people. So be diligent, take the time. If you're a purchaser, provide as much information as you can, be as transparent as you can. I've seen countless times that transparency and security and assurance goes far further than a higher price. If there's any uncertainty regarding your ability to perform in terms of your agreement, even if you've offered a higher price, you're probably going to pay the price for that. If there are any topics or things that you want us to chat about and maybe make some more videos and content about, drop them in the comments, share your thoughts, and we'll unpack them as we have time. So like our channel, subscribe, drop us some comments of what you'd like to see more content about, and we'll make an effort to get this information to you.